Chapter 1. Chapter 1. It is written that the alpha wolf shall find his mate before the autumn solstice, and should the bond remain unsealed, one cannot live while the other still breathes, or the fates shall intervene. The prophecy. If I could do magic, I'd hex the ever-loving shit out of my ex-boyfriend right now. He's leaning over my sister Anastasia Stassi, as we call her table, at the family garden shop, asking her for a tarot reading. Like most of my sisters, she spends her shifts at the greenhouse doing absolutely nothing, but because they have their witchery going for them, my mother couldn't be bothered to care. Picture him in your mind. I'm sure you can guess his type. Thinks he's God's gift to women and is sure no matter what he does, every girl in the room is about to fall at his feet and declare their devotion. Yeah, that's him. Wasn't even sure why he started coming into the greenhouse at first, not until he blatantly began sniffing around my older sister like some kind of horny bloodhound. Jackson Cartwright, womanizing extraordinaire. Of course Stassi is falling for it. I did too once upon a time, until I realized that he had a different girl on call for every day ending with a Y. And I was just one he couldn't pick out of a lineup. If it were Zoe working the counter, or even Alex, I'm sure he'd get a nice pot to inexplicably fall on his head. Unfortunately, even as my fingers twitch against the counter, just itching to throw something at him as hard as humanly possible, I come up empty. Stassi has been doing homework for her newest major change at the local university. She's as flighty as she is beautiful, but my parents couldn't give a damn what she spends their money on. That's the perk of being a full-fledged witch. It's the ultimate hall pass for all things in the Sumner coven. Stassi is one of my 5 sisters. They are all older, although Zoe is only a year ahead of me. All of my sisters could do magic before they could drink. And here I am, 23 and unbloomed. If Jack knew anything about witches or magic, I'm sure my lack of powers would have come up in his "it's not you, it's me" speech when we broke it off last summer. Whatever. Not like I can do anything about it. As he leans over to scribble his number on the blank page of her notebook, I have to swallow the vomit rising in my throat. Seriously, who the hell does he think he is? He even nods at me on his way out the door, leaving my dimwit of a sister to blush and fan herself with her tarot deck. All of the witches have a knack in this family, and hers just happens to be cards. I'd include myself in the classification of witch, but at this rate, the sun will probably swallow the entire solar system before I develop even a fragment of magical power. Yon, I know. Isn't he cute? Stassi asks when his car pulls out of the parking lot. She flicks through the packets of seeds on the counter, each marked down to a quarter. It's probably her way of looking busy, even if it fools no one. I thought so once upon a time, I reply. Too bad there's no room in a relationship for a girl and his ego. 3's a crowd. She scoffs, scrunching her nose in disgust. You're just jealous of me. Jealous? Of the opportunity to have him lay on top of you for a sweaty 12 seconds before asking, did you come? No thanks. Stassi, the guy is a tool. You can do better. She shakes her head to say, God's grace, can't you just be happy for me? I'm happy for you in other ways. Not about this. If you had any sense at all, you'd tear out that page and hex him into erectile dysfunction. He's probably already on his way there, but I don't add that part to the conversation, because I doubt Stassi cares about my warnings. None of my sisters ever listen to me. I'll ask my cards, she says stubbornly. When she pulls the devil from the top of the pile, I fight the urge to burst into laughter. She narrows her eyes accusingly. You're tainting my reading, Grace. I'm not doing anything to your reading, Stassi. She tucks her cards into the pocket of her jeans, shaking her head at me. Whatever. I'm gonna finish my schoolwork at home. Start it, you mean? I retort. You're such a bitch. She slams the door behind her. All it does is cast a gust of air toward some of the succulents who don't seem all that bothered about it. For me, starting fights with my sisters is nothing new. However, as well-intentioned I try to be, nothing I say holds any weight. The greenhouse is probably only afloat because my mother is a probability, which luck and numbers go hand in hand for her, so the business hasn't tanked. Even though our customers are few and far between, we sell flowers and plants, and massive bags of soil, occasionally avocado plants, but only ever seasonally to avoid raising suspicion. Everything is an art of innocuousness. Because I'm the youngest and have the least going for me, according to my Oldest sister, that is, it's my job to look after the family business and pretend I'm not miserable whenever they taunt me about my lack of magic. Like the escape of working because it means I don't have to be in a bustling house full of constant reminders of everything I'm not and worse, all the things I can't do. I'm stacking bags of flower soil when the envelope flies in through one of the open windows and whacks me upside the head. It's a heavy piece of parchment, easily distinguishable from normal mail with its coloring. Magic mail. I toss it absently onto the counter. My sisters are always getting things from the Grand Coven, which is basically the snooty club of powerful witches Mom used to be a part of. The envelopes just show up one day like an allergic reaction or something, and disappear after the recipient opens them to avoid detection from the normies. I'm not sure why one is turning up here though. It must have been looking for Stassi. My shift isn't over for another 2 hours, but I haven't seen anyone other than my sister or the righteous asshole I used to date the entire time I've been here. The day we make a big sale I'll have to eat my pointy hat, but it doesn't seem likely at this rate. I occupy my time straightening the pots and watering some of the leafy aloe sprouts on one of the tables next to the window, letting the sunlight stream in to warm them. As I'm humming some Stevie Nicks under my breath, the envelope, which has moved from the counter to hit me from across the room, makes contact with my arm and falls flat on the table in front of me. But it isn't made out to Miss Anastasia Sumner. It's for me. I rub my eyes to make sure I'm seeing it right, but sure enough, Miss Grace Sumner is written in perfect script on the front of the packet, the ink shimmering with the slightest gleam of a charm. Slowly, I lift the envelope into my hands and dump the contents on the counter next to the cash register. As soon as the letter catches my eye, the envelope vanishes. Dear Miss Grace Sumner, you are cordially invited to attend the summer session at the Pacific Academy of Magick beginning on the 1st of June. This elite program catered to witches, fae, werewolves, and vampires is in attendance through the summer solstice. 6 weeks of intensive magical cooperation and training will occur on campus in Washington State. Please indicate your decision in the enclosed correspondence. We look forward to welcoming you to our school. Sincerely, Headmaster Thorne. Right away I know there's been a mistake. See, my family historically avoids werewolves. We don't exactly have the best record with nocturnal folks, so no Sumner has gone anywhere near the Pacific Academy in the last 50 years. Sure as shit didn't apply, and none of my sisters would be dumb enough to seriously enroll. It's probably a joke one of them pulled, and besides they wouldn't have accepted me if they knew I had no powers of my own. I have to decline. The punchline was great and we can all laugh at my expense later, but there's no way in Lucifer's green earth that I can possibly flirt with the idea of consorting with nocturnal creatures. My ancestors would probably come after me for that one, and then I'd never hear the end of it in the afterlife. For some reason I hesitate when I'm looking at the decision card. In theory, I should be able to check off will not attend and move on with my life, but the pen hovers over the cardstock and never makes contact. After several minutes of scowling at it, unable to move one way or the other, I stuff the letter and admissions brochure into my purse and do my best to forget about it for the rest of my shift. Doing my best unfortunately proves ineffective. I start obsessing about the letter, turning it over in my mind, wondering who signed me up or if it's all an elaborate ploy to mess with me. I've been the brunt of several jokes from my sisters for as long as I can remember, but this is a bit more creative than they tend to get. When closing time rolls around, my mother shows up to lock the doors and do the final cash count. She's this tiny woman with dark curly hair that sparks at the ends when she's pissed off, the same raven hue as mine, minus the sparks because I've never been able to conjure them. Today she's holding a Venus flytrap under one arm, patting it on one of its spindly heads as she walks into the greenhouse. Gracie, did we sell anything today? I shake my head. She shrugs. Oh well. Stassi mentioned a boy came by. A boy. Of course, she wouldn't readily advertise my history with said boy. Anything to keep up her good girl routine. He didn't buy anything. He was more interested in Stassi. I figured as much. I'm a little shocked her trick was never sex magic. This is a nice way of saying my sister is a bit of a skank. My mother tends to keep her less savory opinions quiet, but occasionally she's got a good zinger up her sleeve. Hey Mom, I ask. She pauses over the till, her fingers hovering above the bills. Yes dear. A letter came today. I was wondering if you knew anything about it. She frowns and asks, a letter for you? She doesn't hide her surprise, which I appreciate. The only thing worse than having no magical aptitude is having everyone else pointed out behind your back. Her candor is appreciated, and I'm probably better off for it. Yeah. I take it out of my purse, passing it to her carefully. She shakes her head, her mouth falling open. Grace Wednesday, Sumner, you tell me this is a joke right now? No, Mom, I say. That's the crazy part. I thought maybe one of my sisters was pranking me by applying in my name, but you don't apply to the Pacific Academy of Magick, Mom replies hotly. I got a letter when I was your age, but I declined, of course. The Academy finds the worthiest witches in their 23rd year. But my sisters never got a letter, I observe at a loss. So why me? The Academy must think you have potential. Potential? I sputter. That's nice and all, but come on, Mom. I can't even predict the weather or shuffle tarot cards. I'm the worst witch to ever be born into a magical family. Everyone knows it. Apparently not everyone, Mom says, holding up the letter. This is a high honor. I thought we didn't mingle with nocturnal creatures, I remind her. It was only the biggest rule we had growing up, especially when Stassi had a crush on the only vampire boy in town. Socially, we don't. This is academic, says Mom. And at this point in your life, without any magic of your own, this could be your last chance to awaken any powers. Besides, of all my daughters, I think you have the good sense not to sleep with the first beast that looks your way. Mom is my only ally in this family. That much is obvious. She does raise some good points, but willingly enlisting in a rigorous magical program knowing damn well I have no magic to utilize sounds like a terrible idea. I'm not sure how they even made the mistake of inviting me, but it's too late to question the admissions process. There's only this road. Yes or no? Maybe I've lost my mind, but as Mom finishes the register count, I check off my confirmation of attendance, and the paper vanishes before I can change my mind. I'm locked in now. The letter came exactly 1 week before the start of the term. 1 week to come up with a cover story for my sisters and father, Mom's idea, not mine, and figure out what to bring for my month up north. We live in Salem, Oregon. So while the drive isn't too far away, Washington feels like another world. The rest of the family thinks I'm going to a pagan church camp, which is fine by me. I don't need relentless teasing or my father's increased anxiety over the prospect of one of his daughters birthing werewolf pups. Mom handles the lying for me, which is a relief. If I am being dishonest, I am horribly obvious about it. And somehow it's a world I'm about to be a part of. If I could wrap my head around it, try to make sense of it all, I'd feel less insane about the whole thing. I'd always resigned myself to working at the greenhouse, magic-free and all that, and suddenly here I am. I'll be in a very remote town with nothing around for miles. No service, no people unless you go down the mountain and then some. Sounds like the premise of an 80s slasher film. But as the car pulls up to the wrought iron fence surrounding the campus, it becomes less blood and guts horror and more gothic. Summer school at Hot Topics version of Hogwarts. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. I always arrive before the start of term to avoid the families. There's the pack, of course, but I was orphaned at 10 with an inheritance beyond my daydreams that the thought of a family by blood makes me want to vomit. It's easier to bring my Bentley past the gate before the crowd show up. If it wasn't for my long-standing friendship with Thorne, that Dick and I go all the way back to the Air Force, if you can believe it, I would have stopped teaching a long time ago. I'm not even sure why I do it. I hate people, so electing to surround myself with hundreds of burgeoning fucking minds or whatever is repugnant. Thorne is a vamp but late turned. Some families are born pure-blooded, and their children drink blood instead of breastfeeding. Some are like Thorne, wrong place, wrong time. He got bit 15 years ago, but all things considered, he's taken it well. He greets me at the gate, holding a massive black umbrella over his head to block out the sun, even with his ring designed by a witch to let him walk by day without burning into a puddle of ash. The sun is an annoyance he avoids whenever possible. He adjusts the frames of his sunglasses, peering at me over the tops of them with red eyes. He's fed recently, then. Romulus. I consider my name to be deeply ironic. Remus and Romulus, raised by wolves, parentless. I doubt that's what my mother had in mind when she chose it. Neither she nor my father had any idea they had the wolf gene. If they did, I'm sure they would have picked a less ridiculous name. Thorn, I greet him. His first name is John, which doesn't suit a serious vampire all that much. I assume that's why he prefers to be called Thorn on an exclusive basis. Are you ready for the start of term? He asks. You'll be teaching defensive magic and magical history again. I'm sure you'll have the same success as last year. I've told you time and time again that teaching isn't my calling. And yet, Thorn says, leaning in closer to me, here you are. I can't argue with him there. I did choose to willingly enlist myself in whatever this job entails. I suppose that means I'm not entitled to complain. I know for some of my more philanthropic coworkers, shaping the magic users and creatures of tomorrow is a great honor. Mine is more a consequence of a debt I owe Thorn for saving my life once, but I can't deny that the money is good even if I have no need for it and I can pretend I'm actually contributing to society when I'm out here. But I digress. 3 weeks, 21 days of lessons, surrounded by 23-year-olds. I know that was 15 years ago for me, but if this next batch is anything like I was at that age, the entire school is damned to hell. Remind me why I do this, I mutter to Thorn. He adjusts his sunglasses, pursing his lips over his fangs. You are an alpha, Romulus. As alphas we have responsibilities. It is our privilege, no duty, to ensure we have a presence among our young people. I'm afraid the importance of our role cannot be overstated. He's the alpha vampire, which is a more ceremonial title than anything else. He has a position as the head honcho, the one who directs all the affairs of blood-sucking, night-dwelling folks. Mine is much more hands-on. I run with the pack in this neck of the woods every moon. It's also not an elective position but instead a birthright. If I wanted to spend my days as some Dr. Phil wannabe, holding the hands of every werewolf, I would have made very different choices. Unfortunately, I wound up here all the same. I'm not sure what makes you think I'm cut out for this job, I confess. I told you. You signed the contract. I'm not going to send you home, regardless of how much you bitch and moan. You have an eternity. I don't. I could bite you if I were feeling generous. He snarls playfully at me. Growl back. Thorn has grown snarkier since we last spoke. I can't decide if I find the banter entertaining or irritating. Probably a bit of both. Students won't arrive until tomorrow evening. Nightfall is when all of the festivities begin, although classes are held at all hours, depending upon the subject. Unfortunately, everyone takes history with me, and my least favorite group, the witches, specializes in defensive magic. I'm not even sure how I got roped into teaching that one, but it's been 5 years of the same cattiness, even from the boys. I know Thorn came up with this program as some sort of bonding experience for different classifications of magical beings, but the ties between my clan and the covens of the U.S. are strained. Even beginning to explain them is a sordid tale of woe. Nobody wants to fucking hear. My apartment is on the edge of the grounds. It's a cottage that probably belonged to a groundskeeper once upon a time, but it houses me during the summer months. The blanket of woods, a good distance from wandering students, gives me space to transform without risking the lives of an unfortunate new kid. I take the long way across the field of grass, the marshiness of it swallowing the edges of my boots. It's just rained, which suits the vamps better than everyone else because they tend to enjoy the cloud coverage while the rest of us can't stand it. The cottage is sparse, but I know I get to return to my luxurious apartment in Seattle as soon as term concludes, or even drive out to my cliffside beach manor. That makes living like a squatter more bearable. I suppose I could choose to live on campus, but using my lycanthropy as a means to avoid students outside of class is much better, even if it means I'm staying in a glorified shack. I collapse onto my cot, the lumpy mattress poking me in all the wrong places, and throw an arm across my face. I'll wake up tomorrow more prepared for some introductions, but for now I'm going to get comfortable with the bottle of scotch I brought and pray no one gets the bright idea to bother me. I'm not sure when I fall asleep, only that the next time I'm aware of myself, I'm no longer awake. I know I'm dreaming because the rain doesn't touch the girl. The water falls around her, but just before it should break against her skin it falls short, springs off and vanishes into thin air. The sound of the storm swells around me like an angry orchestra, but the girl is unaffected. No, not a girl, a woman. I can tell by her frame that she's much older than she initially appears, but I can't see her face. Her dark curls obscure her features, leaving only the wild locks of her hair and her silhouette for me to try to identify a person. She doesn't speak. The first thing I notice is that her white dress, which should be clinging to her by now with the way the sky is pouring down over our heads, isn't soaked. She's also not wearing shoes, but the grass and vines at her feet twirl around her ankles, almost cupping her feet with reverence. When she raises her fingers, it's like the whole forest talks back. Hello. I call out to her. Who are you? She faces me now, but the wind blows her hair over her face and hides most of it from me, so I just make out the flashes of her sharp cheekbones, full lips stained with red, and eyes so dark you could drown in them. When she tries to tell me her name, no sound comes out. What are you doing here? I have charms in my suitcase to prevent dreamwalking, so she can't be anything more than a figment of my imagination. If I mentioned it to Thorn, or anyone else at this school for that matter, I'd hear all about the omens of women in white. She doesn't seem like an omen. She doesn't seem like a dream either. Who the hell are you? I demand. Huh. She doesn't speak. All she does is raise her hand to me, and everything goes dark. I haven't forgotten the dream. It occupied the recesses of my mind all morning, even after the staff meetings concluded and enough time had passed that I should have, in theory, been able to forget all about the strange woman. My brain made up as though she'd been conjured from scratch. I don't know why. I can't shake her, even now, as the students are pouring into the old opera house turned gathering place for orientation. All of us teachers are dutifully lined up in chairs on the stage, poised behind Thorn, who you'd think was an orchestra conductor between his suit and elegant fingers. The whole room is silent as they take him in. He doesn't need to do a thing to get their attention. Good evening, he says in a booming voice. I am Headmaster Thorn. You are all here because you were hand-selected to attend the Pacific Academy of Magick. It was not a choice made in vain, and it would do you well to remember that in the coming weeks of rigorous magical training. He's a compelling speaker, I'll give him that. I'm sure if I were here for the first time listening to him, I'd feel as excited as the students seem now, watching him speak. He doesn't undersell the program, which is quite helpful, considering that we maintain a high academic standard. Somehow no one gets up to leave, even when he describes the consequences of failure, the shame of it. Oh, it's a speech I've heard 1,000 times, but for some reason it's different. Now, there's something new in the air, something that makes me feel like all the hair on the back of my neck is standing on end. I need to leave this room. I'm not sure what is causing the urgency, but I do my best to politely excuse myself and leave the auditorium through the back door, hoping to catch some fresh air before I lose control of myself, or more specifically before the wolf does, because he's never been good at handling himself at the slightest flicker of anxiety. The corridor, shrouded by the mezzanine, is blessedly empty. I take a moment to steel myself, using all the right phrases and calming techniques I was taught in the military to avoid a tight spot. I'm certain any ill-fated bastard who decided to come after me would be in a deeply uncomfortable position at this moment, because it almost feels like the wolf wants to start a fight. And why? As I'm mulling it over in my mind, trying to make conversation with a very irrational part of myself, it dawns on me. This isn't the wolf feeling anxiety. No, this is something different. Something I've never felt before. And then I see her. Flushed cheeks, boots in her hands, feet bare against the concrete. She's wearing that white sundress, looking at her wristwatch with a panicked expression. I catch a whiff of her perfume, but it's much stronger than it should be, because it ensnares my senses and becomes all I can focus on. For a moment. Normally I can turn the canine nose off, but not now, not here. For whatever reason, I can practically taste the sweat pooling on her forehead. Vanilla. Rosewater. Her shampoo. She is a mosaic of sensations, and I'm noticing them all. Every sense I have is fixated on her, as though my focus has become a tunneled mess. I'm late, aren't I? She asks. Oh God, I bet you're a professor. Awesome job, Grace. No chance of sneaking in now. She fists her hair in frustration, revealing her face, which while unobscured bears an undeniable resemblance to the one I saw in my dream. Everything falls into place in slow motion, and I am watching it unfold, powerless to intervene. There's no way. No fucking way. The wolf inside me howls, and before I can lunge at her, I turn myself away, forcing my feet to walk in the opposite direction of the girl of my mate. Fucking hell, my mate is a student. My mate is a student and a human, and I can't fucking believe it. Mates are rare. Not impossible, of course, but rare. No alphas in the packs have claimed one in the last several decades, so I assumed I was safe from the burden. Evidently, I was very wrong to assume any immunity would be granted to me. I've always been cursed. Excuse me. My mate Grace calls after me. Is this the right place for orientation? I ignore her because while my instincts wage war for dominance, I know indulging one more look at her will only damn me to her every whim. I have to leave, but Thorn would never forgive me for abandoning my post. Come to think of it, there are only a couple hundred students. I'm sure I could find her full name and make up some excuse as to why she should be unenrolled immediately. Unfortunately, as soon as the very idea crosses my mind, the wolf reminds me I could never hurt her or deny her an opportunity like this one. Practically have the girl holding on to my fucking balls, and we've only just met. And even if I could think of a good reason to expel her, even if the wolf would allow it, Thorn wouldn't. There's nothing I can do, no means of avoiding this situation. Every time we cross paths, I'll be blindsided by her perfume drowning in her features. There won't be any means of recovering me from the path of destruction I'm on a collision course toward. All thanks to the wolf. The fucking wolf. I have to resist the urge to shatter the nearest window with my fist cornered by this impossible woman who doesn't know my name and doesn't even know who I am. Thankfully, she isn't a wolf. If she was, I would have smelled it on her as soon as the bond struck a chord in me. That means she won't have the slightest clue what I am and no ability to sense it the way wolves often do. But if she isn't a wolf, she remains undeniably human. That can only make her one classification I'd hunt for a sport if not for this stupid job. My fated mate is a goddamn. Chapter 3. Growing up as the youngest sibling, I got quite used to sharing. Settling into a dorm room is nothing. If anything, I'm just glad I'll only be getting one roommate rather than two fighting over who gets which bunk bed and what the bathroom schedule looks like. It's just as horrendous as it sounds, believe me. The tiny bedroom does come with its own bathroom, and the which I'm sharing with seems much nicer than Zoe and Stassi. Unfortunately, Mom failed to mention she was dropping me off right before orientation, and by the time I got to the auditorium, the speech had already ended, and everyone is heading back to the dorms. I definitely stuck out like a sore thumb with my suitcase thumping behind me. My tried and true strategy of praying no one would notice me could only go so far. My bedroom is all the way up one of the towers of this sprawling castle mansion mishmash they call a school. The cardio alone, not to mention lugging my carry-on behind me, is enough to have me sweating by the time I made it to room 900. My roommate, who's on her stomach reading tarot cards that look hand-painted, grins at me from her bed. You must be Grace. And you must be. I glance around trying to find something on my information packet with her name on it. Feels like a dick move not to know my roommate's name when she's already figured out mine. I'm so sorry. She chuckles. Your name is on your luggage tag. I sigh relieved. Oh, I'm Paige, she says, extending a hand to me. Paige Ramirez. San Diego. Coven. Grace Sumner, Salem. Oregon or Massachusetts? Asks Paige, cocking a brow. Oregon. She grins. Thank Hades. I was worried you'd say the other one. Those witches are always snobs. You can never trust a New England Sulamere. They always think they're hot shit for burning at the stake. Pun intended. Paige has purple hair, a ring in both nostrils and a septum piercing. All the jewelry in her face has crystals, which I'm sure have different properties for every purpose. Her glasses are the same lilac as the highlights in her dark brown hair, and she seems so sure of herself that I'm almost envious. She slides back onto her bed, giving me space to lug my suitcase to my own and start unpacking. What's your specialty? She wonders, bringing her fingers over the edges of her cards to reshuffle them. Your specialty? She repeats incredulously. Well, maybe you call it something different where you're from. Oh, you mean a trick? A trick makes me feel like I'm wearing a cape and pulling bunnies out of hats, Paige replies with a snort. But sure. What's your trick? I don't really know, I say. It's the truth, but judging by the look in Paige's eyes, she doesn't believe me. She probably thinks I'm being modest or Something which is probably better than her figuring out that I'm a waste of magical blood. Mine is divination. Ups. She waves a hand weighed down by several clunky rings that click together when she moves. Scrying prophecies, tarot dream. Walking mind reading. She wiggles her brows at me. That last part was a load of shit, but you should have seen your face. I can't do any of that, but my sisters read cards. Paige shakes her head. Unless they're diviners, cards read them. Fear. Like me, tarot cards are an extension of your body. They're like hands, to be honest. If you read them right, it's like having a second brain. She holds the deck closer to her ear, leaning her head as though she's listening to them. Speak aloud to her. They want to read you. Do you mind? I kind of do. I mean, getting ready to filth me by a stack of hand-painted tarot cards doesn't sound like the best way to dismiss my nerves about the class is beginning tomorrow morning, but something tells me Paige and her cards won't take no for an answer. I nod, but instead of passing me the cards to shuffle, she seems to pluck my energy without it and begins to draw. There's something romantic about it. Oh, the Emperor and Empress come first, followed by the Lovers, then the Two of Cups, and finally the Wheel of Fortune. Fate. Says Paige. Are you a romantic person? I shake my head. Not particularly. No. The cards seem to think your soulmate is wandering the halls of our beloved Academy, she tells me. In fact, this person is your other half. The Emperor. To your Empress. Your Two of Cups. It's fate that called you both here, but you have to listen for the call because you have to be ready to accept it when it comes. She surveys her cards one final time, then looks back at me. I'm sure my skepticism is obvious to her, because she doesn't say much more than that. Maybe you should take up divination, she suggests. Why? I ask. Because you wouldn't be blindsided so often if you had cards to give you a heads up. She's very blunt, it seems. Her advice doesn't have any trace of animosity, but for anyone ill-equipped for brutal honesty, it could be jarring, to put it lightly. I'm sure you'll find your specialty while you're here. Or your trick, if you really want to call it that. I haven't found any kind of power in 23 years, let alone a specialty, but she and my mother seem to think the same thing, as though this school can cure the lack of magical aptitude flowing through my veins. So, I give her a good-natured smile and take my toothbrush into the bathroom to get ready for bed. No matter how much I worry, tomorrow will still get here. And I can't do anything about it. Thankfully, Paige and I both have our history class first thing in the morning. After breakfast, which mostly consisted of coffee and whatever toast I can scarf down with my nervousness, we find our seats in a massive lecture hall near the back of the room. Most of the rows are at least partially occupied. There are dozens of classmates, all of them from different magical classifications. I don't know anything about them, but the vamps, with their fanged laughter, jump out immediately. The wolves hang over each other like a pack, though that isn't too different from how college-age boys normally act. The rest of us witches are dispersed in a scattered array, probably banded together by covens and regions. My parents walked away from all of this so I wouldn't know friend from foe, or even just neutral territory. The Sumners haven't been part of a coven in a long time, so I can't help but feel like there's absolutely nothing connecting me to my sister witches. It's a divide that grows the longer they look over their shoulders and whisper about us. Paige rolls her eyes. Ignore those two. She gestures to the two girls with matching amber eyes who seem hellbent on gossiping about us. I went out with their brother a couple years ago after a California coven reunion. The asshole ghosted me and still goes around telling people I broke his heart. He sounds like the sort of small-town dick I'd have gone out with a couple of years ago, but I'd rather not give two strangers more ammunition. I hear this professor is the hardest one on campus, Paige tells me once the twins turn back around, presumably bored. They say he's like an alpha wolf. Real big deal. Cool. I shrug. A class is a class. And, she adds, he's hot. Before I can respond, the door to the adjoining private office slams open and out strides the illustrious professor in a black button-down, his sleeves pushed to his elbows and yellow eyes flashing behind the frames of his glasses. Even if we only saw each other for a moment yesterday and I'd say we talked, but he didn't say anything, so it was really just me yapping at him. I know. The scars on his face cutting into his beard anywhere. He's got a very distinct face, and while I hate to admit it, Paige is right. He's hot and dangerous looking. It's probably the worst combination for a Girl like me, who hasn't gotten laid in a couple of years and has probably never had good sex. Ever. He's so handsome that it's almost porn-y, and if I had less self-control I could daydream about a guy like him. Too bad he ran away from me like I had some kind of communicable disease. That'll kill the magic, right? My name is Professor Frey. Werewolf. He writes his name on the board with chalk that scrapes loudly, practically screeching with each stroke. This is your introduction to occult and magical history. If we want to get through these 3 weeks with meaningful knowledge, there will be no time for idiotic questions. Understood? Wow, this guy's a real charmer. Wastes no time with the usual warm and fuzzy welcome to class speeches, I guess. His hotness factor, like most men's, seems to decrease the longer he talks. I will be taking attendance momentarily, he announces, scanning the room. You will be here every day on time. No classes may be missed. This is only a 3-week program, so unless you're on the verge of death, I expect to see each and every one of you here Monday through Wednesday. Understood? Combat or defensive magic, rather, occupies the Thursday and Friday spots. Unfortunately, that means more of Professor Sunshine throughout my week. Joy. He starts to rattle off the names. Because of our last names, Paige and I fall at the end of the roster, and by that point most everyone has stopped paying attention. When he reads her name, she raises her hand in a gesture so calm and unpaged like that I find myself surprised at her lack of quip or even a look in my direction. Sumner, Frey reads off. Miss Sumner. I raise my hand very slowly. Here. Speak up. No one can hear you. I'm here, I say a little more loudly this time. Then under my breath I add, clearly you did hear me in the first place. He stops, putting the roll sheet down on his desk with a measured level of irritation. If you're going to mutter in my class, you should consider the fact I have lycanthropic hearing, Miss Sumner. Sorry, I mumble. Stand up, he says, waving a hand. Now. Slowly, with a panicked glance at Paige, I do. Since you're so keen on speaking out of turn, how about you tell the class your name and classification, he suggests. Louder for those of us who don't have my sense of hearing. I'm a Grace Sumner. Which? He nods. How interesting. Miss Sumner, what would you say your skills are? I blink a few times, feeling dazed at the question. Is this a job interview or something? Skills. This is a very elite student population, Frey tells us, like we weren't already aware. Clearly you must have something to contribute if you're attending this institution. So tell me, Miss Sumner, what is it you can do? I don't know. You don't know? He chuckles humorlessly. Well, then I better let Headmaster Thorne know he's let another empty-headed bimbo into his program again. Suspect he is only inviting witches from the pretty covens. Seems that's all your kind are good for. A trill of laughter. Even some of the other witches are joining in. Traitors. At least I don't chase my own tail, I bite out. Oh, kitten has claws, he says. Right. Since you're so eager to prove yourself. When was this university founded? Of course, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I should, because I'm sure it's plastered on all of the signs around campus talking about the glory days. And our founding chancellors. Slipped my mind, and he knows it. Paige catches my eyes sympathetically. I know he's being an asshole, and I'm not sure how I pissed him off so personally, but apparently I'm the target on his list today. It's enough to make me wonder why I'm here in the first place. I barely slept last night in a strange bed that doesn't belong to me, fighting the imposter syndrome looming over my head like a guillotine blade. How many classifications of non-human beings are there? He asks. And of the human variety? I can't answer that either. I decided to ditch magic lessons, history included, when I couldn't come up with anything on my own. What was the point? If I was just a runt of the litter, right? I see. Well, maybe if you spend your time in this class doing something meaningful, like paying attention instead of making snarky comments, you can leave with some semblance of knowledge. He redirects his attention back to attendance, and now the entire room is balancing their urge to gossip about me and staring at him. Mercifully, he turns off the lights and dives into a lecture, giving me a reprieve from the whispers and stares. By the time class is over, I can't get out the door fast enough. Paige catches up to me as fast as she can, trying to say something about homework. Homework? I sputter. Homework? I need to get out of here. This was a mistake, and I just need to pack my bag and get the hell out of here. You can't. Paige protests. I'm fighting back tears in the middle of the crowded hallway. This feels a lot like high school all over again, and just like in those days I refused to cry in front of anyone. Look, Paige, I appreciate that you're trying to pep talk me or whatever, but I really think this was a mistake and I just need to go home. You can't go home, she says again. No one can unenroll once you're here. The campus is awarded for safety reasons. No one leaves once the term starts. And no one comes in either. I bite back whatever ungodly scream I'm about to release from my mouth. That would have been something to put in the fucking brochure. Most everyone knows, Paige says quietly. Look, I know you had a rough day, but you can just take a nap, get some rest, do something to decompress. That was our only class today anyway. Lucky us, I mutter. Seriously, she tells me. Just take a second. You're meant to be here. My cards even say so. I'm not sure I believe her cards at this rate, but my room is the closest thing I have to a fortress of solitude here, so I wander back upstairs and collapse under my borrowed blankets, pulling them over my head. I'm not sure how long I sleep for, but when I wake up there's a gag in my mouth and I'm being tied to a chair. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. I don't pride myself in being mean to girls. Embarrassing Grace in front of the class wasn't in my plan for the day. The second I saw her on my roster I knew we'd have a problem. The wards were up before I could tell Thorne about the bad news. For better or worse, I'm stuck with Grace, but I have to do my damnedest to keep the truth from my students and, more importantly, her. There's only so much I can do within the confines of the bond. The more I harped on her, the more my chest twisted and the wolf inside me howled for going against every instinct I depended upon since I turned for the first time. I had to start lecturing before I went unconscious. I lock myself in my office until the students clear out, and then I return to the cottage with every intention to substitute liquor for all of my meals and hoping that, by some miracle, Grace Sumner would drop dead or fly her damned broom past the wards miraculously and get the ever-loving fuck out of my life. Except nothing is ever that easy now, is it? The first time I turned into a werewolf was after I got back from deployment. I wasn't expecting it, and when I woke up the next morning covered in blood that wasn't mine with a rabbit corpse in my living room, naked as the day I was born, I realized something was wrong. I didn't believe in monsters. I didn't know the paranormal from the ramblings of a religious zealot, and suddenly I was expected to transform every full moon into a massive dog, and hope I didn't maul anyone in the process. The scars from Afghanistan sure needed to be healed with lycanthropy, right? Talk about awful fucking timing. Everything I learned about being a werewolf came later when the pack found me. I took to being an alpha easily, which surprised me given the fact being a wolf was much harder. Somehow I made it through the first few moons, and by the time we made it to my first major equinox, I could take it all in stride. The unfortunate thing is everything about a mate and all of the business associated with it wasn't something anyone in the pack knew about. All I have are the stories from the elders, the light readings I've picked up along the way. I didn't care about it too much because I didn't think it would happen to me. My mother used to tell me failing to plan was planning to fail. That maxim was better suited being shoved up her ass. It's after midnight when something wakes me from an uncomfortable half-sleep, curved over a book with an almost empty glass of scotch narrowly missing a trip off the side of my desk. I'm not sure why I'm startled awake, not until I hear my wolf inside me howling like a motherfucker. What? I thunder, slamming my hand down on the desk. What do you want? Then I feel it. A hook starting under my ribs, drawing me toward the door. Only have time to get my coat before I'm walking involuntarily out into the woods. I don't mind the trees or the forest. There's something peaceful about walking them in human form, appreciating things through my conscious mind instead of the snippets I get from the wolf's memories after the transformation. The summer wind is nice, but nothing too chilling. At first glance, there's nothing strange happening out here. It's quiet in the same way it always is in the early days of summer, when the sun has yet to reach its hottest and the moons are softer. When I lift my head, raising my nose, I catch a whiff of that perfume, and it dawns on me why the wolf woke me so violently. Grace. No students are allowed in the woods. During the full moon, there's never been anyone dumb enough to venture out where the wolves are running, but as a general practice, the forest can get you close to the protective warding, and injuries have occurred in the past. It's a serious offense, but sometimes the Kids take the risk because young people don't seem to care much for the rules. Or their lives. Grace didn't seem to be making friends, no thanks to me, so it doesn't make sense that she would be out here of her own accord. Not unless she was dragged, kicking and screaming from her dorm. And only a call like that would disturb the wolf. I finally come upon a clearing, just in time to watch some of the warlock boys and one of their vamp friends pitch 2 chairs into the water. Within seconds, Paige Ramirez, the purple-haired witch from my class this morning, surfaces with a scream. "You're dead. I'm going to hex your dick off. You son of a..." "Hey!" I shout. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The boys take off running, crashing through the trees with the vampire in tow, presumably to avoid getting caught. I'd catch them if I could afford to leave. But knowing 2 chairs went down and only 1 girl came up doesn't inspire confidence in me. Paige is climbing out of the water now, calling Grace's name. "Grace? Grace. This isn't funny. What happened?" I demand. When she still looks shell-shocked and dazed, I add, "Now Ramirez." "It's a hazing thing the boys do sometimes," Paige explains. "They tie a couple witches to the chairs, usually the least popular ones, because in the Salem witch trials, a witch could free herself and prove her guilt. We always get free." She scans the water, cupping her hands over her mouth frantically. "Fucking hell," I cry, seething. I ditch my shoes and my jacket and without ceremony, I dive effortlessly into the black water of the lake. It's cold for only a moment and thankfully, the water isn't particularly deep. Where the chairs were dropped. It doesn't take me long to find Grace, and with the claws that automatically swipe from my nail beds at the first sign of danger, I get her free. She's limp in my arms as I yank her to the surface, but when her head breaks the water, she isn't breathing. My wolf is freaking out. He would leave her side to rip the heads off the warlock's shoulders, but she needs us more right now, which keeps me from killing a stupidly young set of students. For now. "Get the nurse." I holler at Paige. "We need a medic for her. Now." Paige disappears, running off toward campus again with a stricken look on her face. I don't have time to worry if she'll make it back quickly because Grace isn't responding, and it only takes a matter of minutes to drown. I set her down gently on the bank of the lake, casting an angry look at the stars. Know what I have to do, though the thought of touching her lips to mine makes every instinct I have scream no, even as the wolf cries yes. I tilt her head back, open her mouth and lower mine to hers. Each huff of breath followed by compressions takes the strain off the bond. Now that we're beside each other, and the wolf is taking over, saving her, something inside me starts to unwind. I can think clearly, reason with myself about what needs to be done. She has no breath, so I give her mine. When she finally starts coughing and spitting the nasty water from the lake in a violent spray, I can't hide the groan of relief the wolf cries through my mouth as I pull back from her. Professor," she stammers. I grab my coat, immediately throwing it around her. "Are you hurt?" She shakes her head. "Did those boys give you anything?" Another shake of her head. "How do you feel?" I reach for her throat, measuring her pulse with my fingers. She sounds okay, and although her breathing is frantic, the wolf seems satisfied that she bears no sign of major injuries. Unlike those boys, once I get a hold of them. "I'm fine," she says, pushing my hand away. "How did you?" "I have a quarters outside of campus in the woods," I answer. "Heard a commotion." It's only half true, but I doubt she's going to ask for much more of an answer than that. It's all I have to give anyway. I don't know why they thought it was funny to do that. Sick fucks. The way she swears, so hushed and almost like she's scared to curse, is adorable. Want to hear her enunciate the word fuck over and over again. Paige said it was a hazing ritual. I leave off the popularity bit because I'm sure she's got enough insecurity about her social life without me jumping in. "If I could do magic, I'd kill them," she mumbles, shrinking further into my jacket. "My chest hurts. Is that normal?" I don't know the first thing about surviving drowning, but I have to assume minor side effects are commonplace. I'm not sure when the medics and the school nurse will be down, but I don't intend to wait on the banks of this river with Grace. The wolf will take it out on me next moon if I don't get her help right away. "Can you stand?" I ask. She winces as she tries, hesitant to put weight on her ankle. "I think they sprained it when they tied me up." I sigh, rolling my eyes. "Impossible fucking woman." "Lift your arms," I order. She glares at me. I can walk just fine. Lift your arms. No, I don't need your help, Professor. Thanks for saving my life, but if today's class proved anything, it's that I don't want you anywhere near. Without further pretense, I scoop her defiant little ass into my arms. She thrashes for a moment, but once she realizes I won't be putting her down until we get to the infirmary, she starts shouting at me instead. You can't just carry me. Put me down. Her shrieks are going to wake up the whole forest at this rate, and yet she continues to scream at me. You're going to injure yourself worse if I do that, I argue. Are you seriously that childish? Her chin quivers. You're the one who insulted me in front of the class. I'm helping you now, I sigh. That doesn't erase what you did. No, it doesn't. Especially because what I did may be the very reason her life was put in danger tonight, and for that I won't be able to forgive myself. Sure, I can't stand the little witch, but I'm not some monster either. And I was wrong for it. Are you happy? She frowns. No. I'll be happy when you apologize, you stubborn bag of beans. I stop walking for a moment, staring down at her in confusion. I can't even be annoyed anymore. Not when she's insulting me with the most made-up string of words I've ever heard in my life. Beans. I repeat. We have to get your head checked by the nurse as well. Then she swings her legs, attempting to kick me but finding herself unsuccessful. Just say you're sorry. I'm sorry, I apologize, deadpan. Are you finished? Put me down. She slaps my shoulders impatiently, struggling more weakly now. Whatever injuries she sustained are taking all of her energy, and I'm not trying to make this journey any more unpleasant for her by dragging it out. I'll deliver you to the hospital first, I tell her, and then you can have your warmest, most genuine apology, princess. Her mouth falls open. You did not. We make it into the main corridor of the academy, bringing her voice down to a more hushed volume. Even still, she seems intent on protesting every step of the way as I carry her to the medical ward. Paige and the nurse, a fae named Gwendolyn, are waiting for us in the hallway when I round the corner. Immediately, the doors fly open, and I'm able to put Grace down on one of the old-fashioned metal beds for evaluation. Sea fae are particularly gifted in sensing injuries, so are wolves with their mates, although this isn't a fact I'll volunteer without a gun to my head. Gwen doesn't seem to find too many worrisome areas for Grace, which fills me with gratitude. She bandages Grace's ankle as I stand in the corner, trying to calm myself down enough to wake Thorn. He's a vampire, but they sleep too, and demand action be taken against those boys before I handle things on my own. And knowing me, I'd prefer if they became fertilizer for the garden. I'll keep her for the night, Rome, Gwen informs me. She should be fine. Thanks to you. Miss Page told me what you did for her. Oh great. Now everyone is going to think I have a bleeding heart for these students, all because I didn't let one of them die. Just doing my job. Well, she is lucky. Gwen starts to walk Paige to the door, presumably to let her get back to her room, but Paige shakes her head and starts refusing. Out of respect for her, and whatever horror she might have experienced tonight, I don't eavesdrop on the conversation, but presumably she talks her way into staying at the infirmary with Grace. Grace massages her ankle gingerly, looking over at me from the bed. Are you going to apologize now? Yes, I say, though my mouth is terribly dry. I'm sorry for how I treated you in class. I let my temper get the better of me. She nods, smiling smugly. That's how you apologize, Professor. Maybe you should take a class about talking to people. Don't push your luck, Miss Sumner. She shrugs. I'd say almost drowning did enough of that. Well, at least she still has her sense of humor. I leave the women for a night of rest, whatever's left of it, and begin my walk to Thorne's quarters for the next phase of my evening, which will be tediously nonviolent, if he has any say in the matter. As I head up the stairs, thinking of how much I'd like to pound those boys into a pulp, the wolf is triumphant. Grace Sumner is from a coven of witches my kind were sworn enemies to for many moons, and yet she's made me care about her at least a bit. Damned witches. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Inventory of my introduction to the Pacific Academy of Magick. First and foremost, marked myself as an outcast, made a professor hate me enough to humiliate me, almost drowned because I'm a fraud as far as witches go, and then was rescued by said professor. There's nothing physically wrong with me. I decided not to volunteer for any Information about the circumstances of my arrival to the school infirmary so as not to get anyone in trouble. Growing up with catty, devious sisters only taught me that survival is possible by not being a snitch, so I don't tell on anyone even when they try to kill me. Paige, who's been sitting beside me dutifully since we got here, hasn't stopped ranting about the hazing ritual. Everyone knows hazing is so 2013, she exclaims. Not to mention they almost killed you. I hope they get expelled for what they did once the headmaster hears about it. He won't, I interrupt. Paige pauses, her jaw slackening. Why the fuck wouldn't he? I don't need to tattle on them. I really don't. I'm probably the only person who couldn't figure out how to rescue myself, and it's probably a tradition that's been going on for as long as the school has been open. Even if my hair is still damp and my body feels like it might never get warm again, I don't feel the need to rush to the headmaster in the dead of night. What happened, and it's over. I don't know how you're being so cool about all of this, says Paige. I wouldn't say I'm being cool about it so much as trying to keep it together. We still have classes to attend. The term isn't close to over, and from what I hear, you don't get to leave Pacific Academy. May as well get comfortable. I lean back in the creaky infirmary bed, sighing. Paige gets comfortable in the bed next to mine, staring up at the ceiling in an almost mirrored pose to mine. Why couldn't you get yourself free? She asks after the silence has stretched almost too long to be bearable. I knew she'd probably ask eventually. The truth is, I hadn't quite decided how I was going to answer her question. I could lie or come up with some excuse, but it wouldn't be a good one. The truth is, I haven't given much thought to how I could manage to get through this term with no access to magic. Coming here was a stupid idea, but it's not like I can take it back now. I just panicked. My magic is impossible to use when I panic. There. That sounds believable enough. Who wouldn't panic when a bunch of psychotic boys break into their dorm and try to drown them? Under those circumstances, we have perfect conditions for panicking. I used to have that problem too, Paige confesses. Maybe after this academic term you'll be cured. Maybe, I agree. We each turn over in our respective beds, but when her gentle snores start to rumble from her side of the room, I realize there isn't a chance in all of hell that I'll be able to sleep comfortably tonight. I wait until it's an acceptable time to be roaming campus before I escape the infirmary. Whenever I got comfortable enough to close my eyes, sleep only lasted a few seconds and then I was gone again, lost in my worries, staring frustrated at the ceiling until I realized that there was no use. I know Professor Frey lives in a secluded little apartment in the woods on campus. There are a number of rumors that circulate as to why, but I think the most obvious reason is that it's convenient when the moon cycle arrives and he needs a place to transform. The second most obvious reason is that the guy hates people. Mr. Sunshine probably doesn't want to share any common spaces, even if it's with other staff. I hear the only person he tolerates is Headmaster Thorne, and even their relationship seems a bit strained at times. I stop by my dorm first to get dressed in something other than stiff pajamas that managed to dry during my sleepless night, but stink of lake water. Settle on a long flowy skirt that swishes against my ankles and a sweater that's loosely knit and falls off my shoulders. Cute but functional, sort of. My motto at this point. I think given my near-death experience, I ought to look alive and, well, even if I don't feel it. The trek down the hill to Professor Frey's cottage isn't too bad. I cut through the woods, brambles breaking underneath my combat boots. The birds have started to chirp, and the morning dew is still settled on the foliage. Around me, the sky is a clear blue still streaked with first light. It occurs to me, as I'm standing at this man's door at 7:30, that he may not even be awake, especially given how ridiculously late we were up last night. Even still, I've already made the trip here and I find myself awkwardly standing with my hand raised to knock, weighing out whether or not I should bother. Are you going to stand there all day? Comes the voice from the inside. Professor Frey opens the door, impatiently squinting at me through the screen door. He's already dressed for the day in a crimson button-down, the sleeves pushed up his forearms to reveal corded muscle. Good morning. I finally managed to squeak out. He narrows his eyes. Are you lost? No. I just wanted to stop by and thank you for last night. There's nothing to thank me for, he says. He seems to pause for a moment, weighing his options just like I did a few moments before. You look like shit. Let me make you some coffee. He unlocks the screen but doesn't open it for me. I turn the knob myself and step out of the sun into his cottage. It's oddly cute for someone as grumpy and masculine as him. There are panels of hardwood floors and cream-colored paint on the walls, letting the light in and giving it the impression of having much more space than it does. He's seemingly filled the antique bookshelf in the corner with many titles I've never heard of. They all seem to be well-loved too, brimming with notes and sticky tabs, the pages yellowing and the spines cracked. I personally prefer a worn book. That's the purpose of them, isn't it, to make them look red? As the coffee starts to brew from the ancient pot heaving to life on the countertop, which consists of baby blue tiles, he looks me over with his scrupulous gaze. There's something about the way he looks at me that I can't get past. He clearly sees more than I see in myself, reading into my thoughts with razor-sharp precision. It's unnerving, meeting someone who seems to know your secrets before you know their name. You're not hurt? He asks. His voice practically sounds like a grunt. I shake my head. No, I'm okay. Thanks to you anyway. He seems to dismiss me, shaking his head. I'm sure you would have figured out how to rescue yourself. I only made the process quicker. Don't you think I would have saved myself already if I could? I'm not sure why the words fly out of my mouth. I wasn't planning on admitting any kind of vulnerability, especially after the way he embarrassed me in class yesterday. What is going on with me? He's not the first person I'd want to tell anything to, let alone that I'm a fraud with zero magic. He raises a brow to say, I wasn't aware you were incapable of helping yourself. I think you're clueless about a great deal of things, but if magic were one of them, you wouldn't be here. It's probably the nicest thing he's said to me. Granted, that doesn't mean a whole lot since we barely know each other, but it's refreshing that he's not berating me or trying to set me up to look stupid. I call that a win. What if I am clueless about magic? I dare to ask. He mulls it over. For a second, I'm wondering if he heard me correctly or needs me to repeat myself. Then he finally chuckles. Sure, I picked up on the fact you clearly lack a classical magical education. That became clear the moment you sat down in my lecture hall. I think the Pacific Academy wouldn't have accepted you if you were incompetent from a magical standpoint, though. That would just be illogical. But I am, I admit. Once the words spill out, bubbling out of my mouth like a geyser, I can't stop myself from saying them. When I was a kid, my sisters always teased me for being a late bloomer. I've been waiting on my magic for years now. Everyone in my family has some kind of gift, and I can barely cook without the intervention of anything supernatural. I know some witches are slow to develop powers, but I've never heard of anyone in the last century who struggles like I do. It's humiliating. It feels good to say it, to finally admit what's been brewing inside of my head for so long, but even confessing it doesn't make me feel better about accepting my spot at this academy. I'm fool's gold in a trough of genuine stones, and sooner or later they're gonna find me out. Or worse, there will be no one to save me the next time I'm involved in some witchy hazing ritual that will undoubtedly have me killed. Frey passes me a cup of coffee, black and swirling with the first spoonful of sugar. Then he slides the cream across the table wordlessly. So what, I've made you speechless? He shakes his head. It amazes me how little every student seems to know about Pacific Academy. I swear, each class of arrivals knows absolutely nothing about our campus, its legends, or its history. How could you possibly be offered a spot? I didn't tell you any of that so you could insult me, I say, clutching the coffee so much tighter that the heat bleeds into my hands. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm simply making an observation. I think that you would have saved yourself a lot of anxiety if you'd done some research. He takes a slow sip of his coffee, and I pointedly ignore the way his angular jaw moves, how sexy his face is when he's just woken up and the rest and ease of morning is still hanging over him. Do you only speak in riddles, Yoda? He's not amused. You can't enter the campus if you don't have magic. It's why there aren't any humans or townspeople wandering in. It's impossible for them to walk in through the gates. People like us are the only ones who can. Phew. Were truly a runt with no powers, you never would have been accepted or made it past the front door. I suck in a breath. Okay, new information. Admittedly, I wasn't expecting there to be an underlying pep talk. He is right, I could have saved myself anxiety with some research, except I have no idea how I'd even go about conducting it, given that magic isn't my thing and this is as close as I've gotten to an education in it, probably ever. You really spent your whole childhood without a hint of magic? Frey asks. Not even accidental? I shake my head, my cheeks flushing with heat. No. By the time my sisters were all 10 years old, they'd exploded birthday cakes, delivered death prophecies, and even made animals show up at the door in flocks. My mother just assumed I had a lot of self-control before she realized I was just failing to do what every other witch figured out naturally. I know I'm providing him with the ammunition used to torture me throughout my girlhood, but somehow it feels right. He doesn't seem all that fazed or judgmental. I didn't know I was a werewolf until much later in life, he tells me. Though I suppose the circumstances are a bit different. I didn't know there was anything missing, or rather waiting to be woken up. He walks over to his shelf and passes me a book. Pacific Academy of Magick, a Century of History, the cover reads. It sounds like an utter snooze fest, but he's tabbed so many pages out of it, and the edges of his heavy-handed scrawl admittedly have my attention. At the very least, I want to know what he took notes on, even if I don't care much about the text. Do yourself a favor, he says. Your classmates won't know anything from that book, and especially given your predicament, it'll be nice to have an advantage over them, something they don't know. He's probably right. I'm still trying to process everything else we've talked about, and the book feels like a secondary concern. So I have powers? I ask. Hell forbid you only be a pretty face, he says with an eye roll. A pretty face. The words reverberate around my skull, ringing in my ears as if they were a shout and not a statement. Pretty. He thinks I'm pretty. That. Or he's mocking me. The latter seems more likely, even if his tone was a little more earnest than a cruel one would suggest. I don't need to think about it, and yet I'm absolutely dwelling on it. He's attractive, but he's also a dick. Why should I care what he thinks? You ought to keep that bit about your inadequacies to yourself, though, because I don't think attracting more attention, especially any that may lead to more witch trials, will do you any favors. Fly under the radar. Got it. I polish off my coffee quickly enough to avoid spending any more time in the lair of Professor Frey. Even if he's not biting my head off now, things could change any minute. I guess I got what I came for, even though I ended up running my mouth. A nagging thought in the back of my mind jumps forward, demanding, but what if he said too much too? What if he was confessing to? I walk back to campus, ready for breakfast and my first class of the day, which thankfully isn't his, with my mind on our conversation. Was he being honest too? It doesn't matter now, I stubbornly remind myself. All I can do is read the stupid book and somehow get through this term. Maybe even without another witch trials incident. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The education of the magical world has been a tumultuous thing at best. This is how I start my fourth lecture of the term. I realized after the fact I was giving Grace an advantage, even more so than I anticipated initially. Because accompanying this lecture is a pop quiz about the history of Pacific Academy. I don't do people favors, so why the hell am I giving her anything? It definitely happened subconsciously. Stupid fucking Bond. Grace and Paige, who seem to have become utterly inseparable, are sitting together in the back row. I would rather not be looking at Grace, but she seems to catch my eye whenever I let my mind wander, and my self-control falls by the wayside. She's in another one of her long flowing skirts that swishes around her ankles, rings glittering from every finger of her hand. The light catches them when she moves over the page, taking notes dutifully. My lycanthropy has heightened my senses, and the fact I can smell each individual whiff of perfume or the nervous sweat of one of the boys trying to pick up on girls in class is overwhelming at times. With Grace, her perfume soars above the rest, dominating my attention and making it impossible to look away from her longer than a few moments. Pacific Academy was instituted to compensate for the erratic education that plagues our kind. A need was met when the institution came to be, and Thorne, our dutiful headmaster, has always ensured the mission of this university remained at the center of all educational practices. This legacy, this long-held tradition, is what brings us here today. Grace bites down on the end of her pencils when she concentrates. Fuck. What classifications of beings are allowed to attend this academy? I look over the room, watching hands raise slowly. 4. 6. Let's try a new approach, I say. Can anyone name them? Look around in this classroom. Which groups are represented? What students have made the honor roll or gotten a picture hung up in the hallway? Tell me, what do we see? I gesture towards a woman in the front row, giving her the chance to speak. Werewolves, vampires, shifters, fae, witches. The student answering. Vampire girl with red eyes that sparkle in the dim light of the projector. Pauses. I think that's it? Do you think, or do you know? Grace finally chimes in from the back. She's only, half right. Historically, only those groups have made it to attend the academy mostly, because they're the ones that make up most of the non-human population. In actuality, there are an infinite number of possibilities. The only criteria is that they have to be users of magic. And new species crop up every day. A werewolf boy I recognize from another pack chimes in. Both of you are correct, I tell them. In fact, I'm impressed by the level of detail in your response, Miss Sumner. I'd consider it a redemption given your horrendous display earlier this week. Whatever pride lit up her expression fades into irritation. I'm a dick, but not without a reason. I need to throw her off, avoiding any possibility that she'll discover we're fated mates. I can ignore the call all I want, but the more time I spend in her presence, the more I feel like she can figure me out without any effort. If you'll turn your attention back to the projector, we're going to examine the many headmasters this school has recruited and what precisely they did to shape Pacific Academy. I've given this information a number of times. The lecture is as familiar as the back of my hand or the color of my claws when I transform, and yet my mouth is dry, and my nervousness causes me to trip over my words. Granted, it was only once, but I'm still shocked that it happened at all. I'm exceedingly glad class is over when I finally dish out the papers for the quiz. None of the students are enthusiastic about the material, but I couldn't care less. It's their grade, not mine, and certainly not my fucking problem. The pile sits in the basket of my desk, but instead of reading them like I normally do upon collection, I let the paper sit and lock myself in the office that adjoins the lecture hall for a moment of peace. Breathing feels a bit like a chore, but I refuse to allow myself to give in to the desire to find Grace, pin her down, and kiss the hell out of her. No, devour her. The wolf wants every inch of her, and I'll be damned before I let him do the talking. I wonder what Thorn would say if I brought it to his attention. Would he make an exception and banish her from the grounds? Would he fire me and end my suffering every moment Grace Sumner and I share a space? Either way, I want a solution, when the simple fact of the matter is that he'll probably tell me to find some self-control and ignore the call of the wolf aching for his mate. He doesn't know the first thing about bonds, especially because vamps have very different ones, so I don't think any of his advice would be fucking helpful. I've never heard of anyone fighting their mating bond. Most wolves are thrilled when they meet their mate, as it gives them someone to run within the pack, to answer every call, and make up their other half. I've always thought that romantic nonsense was a disgusting crock of shit, and I also never expected I would be confronted with the prospect of meeting my mate. How do I unmeet her? Is that even possible? Once the lecture hall is empty and all of the students make their way to the dining hall for lunch, I walk toward the library. Of the thousands of texts, surely one of them knows a thing or two about werewolves and their bonds. Even if I don't know of a wolf rejecting his mate, it's happened at least once, right? I enter the familiar space, inhaling the smell of worn paper and the Earl Grey tea of the woman working at the desk. She's a witch who deals primarily in numbers and telekinesis, which is probably why the system ordering the books is the most meticulous arrangement in the entire university. What can I help you with, Professor Frey? She asks. I need books about werewolves, mating and bonds specifically. Do we have anything available? She nods. I believe there should be some on the third floor towards the back. Thanks, Hazel. She smiles at me, resuming her attention on the pile of books she's sorting on the cart. Her magic is so palpable and warm it's like stepping into the summer heat. I wonder if Grace will ever have power like that, but as soon as my mind wanders to her, I sharply correct myself. No thoughts of Grace. I don't need to think about the girl. I need to eliminate the problem. The library is divided into 3 tiers with wrought iron staircases that wind between the floors. I trudge up to the 3rd floor, the most dimly lit, with books covered in a thick layer of dust. These are the volumes that never get referenced in classes and have been around since the university was founded. Needless to say, foot traffic up here is few and far between. as I'm looking in the bond section for anything about werewolves, trying to decipher titles with my limited knowledge of Latin. A voice startles me. Page. Can I help you, Miss Ramirez? I should warn you we're outside of office hours, so if you have a question related to class I won't be able to answer. You can come back during the appropriate time frame. This is my personal break. She doesn't respond to my words. She seems completely blank in the face, devoid of expression, her eyes wide but vacant. The prophecy, she mumbles. The what? I frown, getting a bit closer to her and snapping my fingers under her nose. Speak up, Miss Ramirez. Do you need to go to the nurse? Is something wrong? The prophecy is as follows, she says, louder this time. She doesn't look at me, she looks through me. It is written that the alpha wolf shall find his mate before the autumn solstice, and should the bond remain unsealed, one cannot live while the other still breathes, or the fates shall intervene. She's not making a lot of sense. Her eyes are glowing with this vibrant shade of purple that's definitely not normal, and the more she talks, the flatter her voice gets as she enters a trance no one can take her out of. What? I finally demand. What the fuck are you going on about? She says it again, still as clearly as before, not missing a single syllable. The words come out as scripted and automated as a machine. She finally stops. After a third time, coming back to herself with a sudden jolt. Her hand slams down on the railing, catching her before she falls. Whoa, she says. What happened? Paige looks around, frowning. How did I get up here? Professor, are you all right? You look pale. I'm sure I do. Nothing gets your heart racing like the idea that, and unless you fuck your student, you both could end up dead. It's one hell of a prophecy to lay on someone before lunch. Your divination skills are impressive, Miss Ramirez, I say, but perhaps practice them with someone who is willing. She seems puzzled. I am afraid I don't follow. Have a good afternoon, I say brusquely, narrowly avoiding shoving her on the way to the stairs. The library is growing to be a bit more crowded now, and I don't care to have any more witches deliver unsolicited information to me. Instead of getting something to eat, I make a break for my cottage, hoping to isolate myself until the anxiety passes. I have to do something to break this curse. I have to find a way to keep myself from falling into the trap of accepting my mate. A witch especially. One who can call information to her would be useful. I only have a limited time to find a solution, and if I don't make haste, the consequences could be utterly life-threatening. Fuck. Grace doesn't know how to use her magic, but maybe I can teach her to call the right books to her and save us both. The question is, how honest would I like to be? How much am I willing to confess to make a deal with her? The sun is beating down on my head, making even more sweat crawl down my face, until it falls against the grass. Shit. I'm letting this get under my skin. I'm not sure when I became a fucking pansy who allows that to happen, but apparently I'm too weak for my own damn good. When I finally make it to my place, which takes too long for my comfort, I find that Grace has already been here, and she's left a present behind. Her perfume still clings to the air around me, but as far as I can tell, she's left already. The book. On the cover is a new note, pinned on pink stationery. Professor, thanks for letting me borrow your copy of this book. I definitely learned a lot, and I think I'll be able to pass more of my classes thanks to your guidance. It was a good read, as were your notes. If there are any other recommendations you have, please feel free to send them my way. It would mean a lot. Grace Sumner. My heart, now beating in my throat, seems to be pushing all the blood in my head into my ears, crashing like the sea against the rocky shore. It's all I can hear, all I can focus on. Louder, louder until I'm almost deaf. I call Thorn before I can stop myself. He answers on the third ring, and each second of waiting is agonizing. You may not fail every student, he says, before I can tell him anything. I'm sure your notoriously hard tests may yield disappointing results, but you cannot fail all of them just for annoying you. That's not my concern, I reply. I'm surprised. Usually your first qualm of the year, which comes around this point, is about the students you've administered the first quiz to, setting a pathetically low curve. He laughs. I can imagine he's watching students take their midday break across the lawn, a king in his palace. If you aren't threatening to fail the student body, what can I help you with? I need you to expel Grace Sumner. He says nothing. The silence is loud, deafening even. What did she do? She's powerless. I'm sure she found a way to get past the wards without a hint of magic, and while I'm not sure how she does it, I know she has no capacity of her own. She's a waste of educational resources and must be expelled before any of the staff wastes their time on a human girl. I know I'm not being fair. In fact, I know I'm being needlessly cruel. Especially given her confession was private and vulnerable, but I don't care. I want to save both of us, and this is the only solution I can think of. My last Hail Mary. Is this about the mating bond? Thorn asks. What? I sputter. He laughs heartily. Romulus, you aren't the only werewolf I have on staff. The students, thankfully, are oblivious to any bonds outside of their packs. But the other teachers notified me as soon as they realized you were linked to her. Does she know? No, and she never will, I growl. The situation needs to be handled. She needs to leave this academy before anything happens. She's a consenting adult. I'm sure if anything were to happen, it would only benefit you as an alpha. She's a witch. She's your mate, but I've washed my hands of all of this. It's not my responsibility to deal in the rituals of a magical race I am not a part of. I'm sorry this is causing you such grief, but it's not my problem, Romulus. You must understand there isn't anything I can do about this. You're the one who must deal with it, no matter the outcome. There's something so foreboding about the way he says it. No matter the outcome / as if there's another outcome to be had, another solution or result to my plight that won't end in unspeakable disaster. I'm going to have to make a deal with Grace if I want to save us both. Fucking hell.